This film begins by showing a countryside area in America where a man named Cash is seen working out right after waking up before he starts his usual day. In the past, Cash used to work for Big Cat, the most powerful boss of the local drug mafia. But he decided to leave that world behind after his younger brother died from an overdose. Now, Cash works on the ranch that belonged to his parents, along with his older brother, Finney, and Finney's teenage daughter, Savannah. Cash and Savannah seem to have a close bond, especially since Savannah lost her mother in a car accident some time ago. One day, after taking care of all the animals on their farm, Cash invited Savannah to have lunch together at a nearby cafe. While they were enjoying their meal, they chatted about different things until Cash excused himself to go to the restroom, leaving Savannah alone. Suddenly, three men who worked for Big Cat, their old mafia boss, sat down at Savannah's table and made her feel uneasy. Luckily, before they could cause any trouble, Cash returned and asked Savannah to wait for him outside because he needed to talk to Big Cat's men, led by the Buck. At that time, Cash was curious why the Buck and his group had interrupted their lunch, so he asked them. The Buck explained that their boss wanted to talk to Cash about his farm. This surprised Cash because he couldn't understand why their old boss would be interested in their ranch. The Buck jokingly suggested that Cash discuss it with Finney. Curious, Cash hurried home to ask Finney about the situation. To his surprise, Finney admitted that he had pawned their farm's land certificate to Big Cat because he needed money to buy animal feed. Cash was frustrated with his brother's decision, especially since Finney could have pawned the certificate to the bank instead of dealing with the mafia. The next day, Cash went to see Zeke Barkley, who is Big Cat's son, to ask about the deed for their ranch that Finney had given as collateral. There, Zeke told him that Finney had traded the deed for a lot of money, which Cash might not be able to repay. Zeke suggested that Cash should meet with the mafia boss directly to try to make a deal and pay off the debts. Meanwhile, at home, Finney and Savannah were confronted by Big Cat's men who demanded payment for the debt, even though it wasn't due yet. Since Finney couldn't pay, the thugs attacked him and Savannah and then dragged them out of the house. In a scary moment, one of the thugs accidentally shot Finney in the ear as a warning. When Cash returned home, he was shocked to see Finney injured and Savannah terrified. Savannah explained that Big Cat's men had attacked them because of the debt. Finney apologized for causing trouble, and Cash reassured him that they would find a solution to their problems. Cash then went to the police station and asked the sheriff for help to catch Big Cat's men who had attacked his family, and also to provide protection for Finney and Savannah. Unfortunately, the sheriff said they couldn't help Cash because there wasn't enough evidence. So, Cash had to leave the police station and decided to meet with Big Cat to negotiate. When Cash arrived at Big Cat's place, his old boss welcomed him. Cash asked how he could pay off Finney's debts, and Big Cat offered him a deal. If Cash completed 3 tasks for her, she would clear Finney's debts. Cash had no choice but to agree. That night, Cash started the first task with the Buck. They were supposed to monitor a house suspected of being a rival mafia's headquarters. Soon after, Cash got closer to the house and saw mafia members inside counting money. Then he quickly reported this to the Buck, who then called their colleagues to attack the enemy base that night. Turns out not long ago, a group of Big Cat's men, along with the Buck and Cash, attacked a rival mafia group. They were able to defeat them quickly. Cash then met with Big Cat to report the success of the attack. The next day, Cash talked to his friend Wilder at a bar about his problem of being dragged back into the mafia world because of Finney's debt. At that time, Wilder, who used to be in the mafia but became a priest, advised Cash to pray and seek help from God so he wouldn't get trapped in the mafia world again. The next morning, Cash was picked up by 2 of Big Cat's guys, Lazarus and Harlan, for a drug deal with a dealer from Mexico. They drove to the spot where they planned to make the deal, near the edge of a forest at the border between America and Mexico. When they got there, Cash helped Harlan unload the drugs. But suddenly, Lazarus pulled out his gun and shot Harlan. Cash was shocked and asked why. Lazarus said he was tired of Harlan insulting his family. To avoid more trouble, Cash asked Lazarus to hide Harlan's body before the dealer arrived. Not long after, the Mexican dealer showed up with his crew. He asked where Harlan was because he didn't want to do the deal without him. At that moment, Cash tried to cover up by saying Harlan had some issues, so he and Lazarus were there instead. But the dealer wasn't buying it. Then, the dealer still refused to go ahead with the drug transaction. Cash and Lazarus felt pressured because they didn't want to disappoint Big Cat, so they ended up killing the dealer and 2 of his men. After making sure all the dealers from Mexico were dead, Cash and Lazarus took the money that the dealer was going to give to Big Cat. This way, Cash completed his second mission. A few hours later, while washing the car, Cash told his older brother that he was trying to pay off all of Finney's debt to Big Cat by doing 3 jobs for her. Cash also said he had completed 2 of the missions and had 1 left. Finney, knowing Big Cat's tricky ways, asked if Cash was confident that Big Cat would keep her promise after he finished all 3 jobs she assigned him. Cash then declared that he was ready to confront Big Cat and her men if they didn't keep their promise. Later on, Cash and Finney started teaching Savannah how to shoot so she could defend herself if Big Cat's men bothered her again. On another day, Cash took on his 3rd job. He had to work alone to trick Sheriff Duke Parks, who often got in the way of Big Cat's illegal activities. Cash's task was to lure Duke to Big Cat's headquarters by telling him about a place where illegal drugs were made. At that time, Cash gave Duke the address of the warehouse where the drugs were made, making Duke thankful because he didn't realize Cash was tricking him. That evening, the Buck and his friends came to pick up Cash to go to Big Cat's headquarters for a celebration party with all the Mafia members. Since Cash had completed 3 missions for Big Cat, he was invited too. When they arrived, Cash saw everyone gathered in the living room, enjoying food provided by Big Cat. Big Cat gave a speech celebrating their recent increase in profits. Shortly after, they moved to another room where the Buck brought in Duke, beaten up and tied up. Big Cat planned to execute Duke in front of everyone. Feeling guilty for Duke, Cash asked Big Cat if he could take Duke outside to finish him off. He planned to save Duke, but Big Cat refused and killed Duke with a knife right there in front of everyone. A little later, Cash discussed Finney's debt, thinking it would be settled after he completed 3 missions for Big Cat. But Big Cat casually said that wasn't the deal anymore. Instead, Cash would have to keep working for her indefinitely to pay off all of Finney's debts. Disappointed and feeling like Big Cat was lying, Cash decided to leave the headquarters. The next day, Cash called Finney to tell him that Big Cat had broken her promise. He urged Finney to take Savannah and go somewhere safe, away from Big Cat's group. At that time, Cash planned to get revenge by taking down all the members of Big Cat's group who had lied to him. Finney agreed and planned to leave after they attended church because they had an appointment with Welder. After the call, Cash started scouting Big Cat's base, figuring out where security was weakest. Meanwhile, Finney and Savannah were at church for the morning service led by Wilder. Afterward, they said goodbye to Wilder because they planned to leave the village that day as Cash had instructed. As Finney and Savannah were heading to their car, the Buck and some other men from Big Cat's group suddenly attacked Finney, badly hurting him. Savannah screamed in terror as she watched her father being beaten by these Mafia members. Finally, Wilder showed up and chased away the Buck and his friends. Because Finney was badly hurt, Wilder and Savannah rushed him to the hospital. Later on, Cash received news of the attack and hurried to the hospital to check on Finney. Sadly, when Cash arrived, he found out that his older brother had passed away from losing too much blood. Devastated, he met Wilder at the hospital and decided to seek revenge for Finney's death. Even though Wilder couldn't stop him, he reminded Cash to be careful when seeking revenge. The next day, Cash took action by killing 2 of Big Cat's men who were using drugs in a car. It was a warning to Big Cat. The police found the bodies and started investigating. Soon after, Big Cat arrived at the scene and asked the chief sheriff about his men's deaths. The chief sheriff suspected Cash because his car keys were found there. At that time, the chief sheriff seemed to be following Big Cat's orders to avoid Duke's fate. The following day, the Buck and his friends went to Wilder's house to find Savannah. However, Wilder didn't want to tell them anything, so they beat him up. Savannah couldn't bear to see Wilder hurt, so she surrendered herself to the buck. Before they left with Savannah, the buck told Wilder that he would be released if Cash turned himself into Big Cat's headquarters. A few hours later, Cash went to Wilder's house to see Savannah, but instead, he found Wilder with a bruised face. Wilder apologized for not being able to protect Savannah well. He also passed on a message from the buck, asking Cash to go to Big Cat's headquarters immediately. After hearing this, Cash asked Wilder for help to save Savannah by kidnapping Zeke to use as leverage for her release. Despite being hesitant at first, Wilder agreed to help his friend so they could rescue Savannah. Soon after, they went to Zeke's workplace and kidnapped him. Cash then called Big Cat to tell her that Zeke was their hostage and demanded Savannah's release in exchange for his safety. Reluctantly, Big Cat agreed and told Cash to bring Zeke to her headquarters. After hanging up, Cash decided not to trust Big Cat and asked Wilder to take Zeke alone. At that time, Cash planned to sneak into Big Cat's headquarters from the back road. At the agreed time, Wilder drove Zeke, who was tied up in front of his car, to Big Cat's headquarters. As they approached, Big Cat's men prepared to attack Wilder with their weapons. But Wilder, knowing Big Cat wouldn't let Savannah go easily, aimed his gun at Zeke. Meanwhile, Savannah was tied to a chair. When Lazarus, who was guarding her, let his guard down, she quietly freed herself by cutting the ropes with a sharp iron behind her. Once free, she grabbed a nearby gun and shot Lazarus, causing him to fall out of the window. Big Cat then ordered the buck to check inside the house, while she and her men exchanged gunfire with Wilder, who had managed to disable some of Big Cat's men. At the same time, Zeke seized the chance to run away into the forest. Meanwhile, Cash had successfully taken down several guards around Big Cat's headquarters. He also managed to shoot some of Big Cat's men with the help of Wilder, even though Wilder got injured when Zeke, hiding behind a tree, shot him. Annoyed, Wilder fired back and hit Zeke in the leg. Despite his injury, Zeke tried to flee into the forest, but he was attacked by Big Cat's fierce dogs, drawn by the scent of his blood. Hearing Zeke's screams, Big Cat rushed to find her son, only to discover that he had been killed and eaten by the dogs. Meanwhile, Wilder continued to fight, eventually taking down all of Big Cat's men, despite being wounded himself. On the other hand, Cash finally managed to sneak inside. There he is trying to find Savannah. However, he's suddenly chased by the buck. Despite the chase, Cash uses his skills to defeat Big Cat's men. Once he finds Savannah, Cash urges her to escape through the window. But their escape is blocked by Big Cat, who aims a gun at them. Seeing no other choice, Cash decides to confront Big Cat alone. As Cash faces Big Cat, Savannah, determined to save her uncle, surprises everyone by attacking Big Cat from behind, causing her death. In the end, we see Wilder, who survived the ordeal, giving a sermon at church. Meanwhile, Cash and Savannah return to their daily lives, caring for the family farm. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is always remember, if you owe someone money, just bake them some cookies instead of getting involved with mafia bosses, cause it's safer and tastier.